Good morning, Stephen. That was a great summary.
Does this bring an end to what has been the most bizarre legal exercise in Australian history?
It is absolutely, I'm gobsmacked by the result. It seems to me to be like Ben Roberts-Smith all over again. You've got a man who's committed a reprehensible act. He's accused of that act, and then he sues a whole bunch of people to try to cover it up, and his litigation is spectacularly a spectacular failure.
You and I have discussed this before, though, that high-profile defamation cases rarely result in the person or the plaintiff walking away with their reputation intact.
Yes, that's so true. It seems that the people who are bringing these cases are not your normal run-of-the-mill people. They're people who have a real axe to grind, or they're the sort of people who do the crimes in the first place. I mean, Ben Roberts-Smith, murdered people, and this fellow committed a sexual assault in Parliament House. So the sort of person who does that in the first place, I think, is not your average person, and they're bringing litigation, I think, for ulterior motives, which is to try to cover up their crimes. Having
said that, nobody has walked away from this litigation, well, with the exception of the former Chief of Staff to Linda Reynolds, the minister in whose office this happened, and Fiona Brown was effectively vindicated. Nobody has come away from this smelling of roses. Justice Lee was fairly scathing in his assessment of everybody.
Yes, that's right. I think you're absolutely right. She was really the only one who came out of it well. There was criticism of Channel 10. There was criticism of even Lisa Wilkinson, who ultimately she was vindicated. There was criticism of Higgins, although she's clearly a victim of a serious crime. And there was obviously overwhelming criticism of Lehrmann, who was deemed to be or found to be a deliberate liar. And really, by bringing this case, he's a bully as well.
Does this, I guess, open the opportunity for criminal proceedings to be recommenced? Because whilst the criminal trial was aborted due to juror misconduct, that doesn't actually prevent it from starting again at any stage, does it?
Yes, that's right. So they're sort of independent issues. Certainly, the finding here would support a criminal case because the finding is consistent with him doing the wrong thing. But that said, it's independently it's up to the ACT public prosecutor to make a decision as to whether to bring the criminal case again, and they could do that any time. It was aborted. It wasn't dismissed. It was just it was aborted because of the jury misconduct. So they could bring a criminal claim against him. Although I just suspect this whole thing needs to come to an end at some point.
So what happens now? Because there will be, I imagine, a costs order at some stage, which now the cost of this case could run into the tens of millions. Now, whether or not a costs order amounts to all of that, but it's unlikely that Bruce Lehrmann has that money. And now that his reputation has been sullied even further, his opportunity to, gain employment, which would allow him to pay that, is probably next to nil. So who actually pays for all of this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I'm not sure how he's funded the case so far and whether his solicitors are charging him or they're doing it on some speculative basis or some even pro bono basis. I don't know. So if there would be a huge legal bill that he's got to pay his own solicitors, and then there'd be a cost order against him. I suspect he'll end up bankrupt because of this.
So then if that happens, though, nobody gets paid. Lawyers don't like that.
Yeah, well, that's right. Probably Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson's lawyers have been paid along the way, so that they will have been paid just out of the funds from Channel 10. And I think Lisa Wilkinson was successful in her application to get Channel 10 to meet her legal bills, which I think was something like $750,000. So they will all be paid, but they at the end of the day, there'll be no recovery of legal costs for the victims.
Now, there is still the defamation case that is underway in Western Australia between Linda Reynolds and Brittany Higgins and her now fiancé David Shiraz. Does this in any way impact that?
So they're totally independent cases. I think they will impact the way the public sees it and therefore possibly impact the settlement discussions and so on. I think the support for Brittany, this has got to be a win, a huge win for Brittany Higgins, and that there's going to be a lot more support for her than there was previously, and I think that's going to impact the way you see that case. But in terms of legal issues, they're completely independent.
The other issue here is that the criticism of Brittany Higgins from Justice Lee was around I guess and for lack of a better way of putting it, a manufactured narrative around a cover-up and the way she was treated post the incident itself. What impact does that now have on the payout that she got from the federal government of $2.4 million, but also suggestions that that'll now be referred to the National Anti-Corruption Commission.
Yes, well, that's fairly spectacular. I think the claim, the amount of money that she got paid was to do with her workplace injury, and this judgment supports that there was a workplace injury, if you like, in the sense, assuming you can accept that Parliament House was a workplace and that they were there in relation to work, and I think you can argue about that forever, but that's been the finding. And so I don't think that, I think this case, if anything, will support the payment to her, not take away from it.
How does the actual legal aspect of this work? Now, I understand that on the balance of probability, so Justice Lee looks at the information and says, look, this is what I think happened based on what's in front of me, but that's still not definitive. How does the law actually work around that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's a philosophical question and a practical question. All we can ever really do is hope that somebody sits down, somebody smart and reliable, sits down, looks at all of the evidence, talks to all of the witnesses and gathers it all together, weighs it up with using their common sense, and obviously sometimes that's through a jury trial if you're dealing with a criminal matter, but in this case a civil matter, it's just a judge, and weighs up and makes a judgment call on what they think happened or didn't happen. We never know for sure. And what we try to do in a civil case is say, given we just want to work out what's more likely than not, whereas in a criminal case we want to work out what's beyond reasonable doubt, because we're going to put someone in jail, we're going to interfere with someone's freedom, and that's such a serious offence by the state that we need to be even more sure.
The other thing I found curious is that Justice Lee went to great pains to say that whilst a lot of the witnesses have told untruths on the stand, that doesn't necessarily mean everything they've said is untrue.
Yes.
But given that this ultimately comes down to a he said, she said, surely the dishonesty plays into the decision.
Yes, it certainly does. So issues of credit are critical in this case, and you need to look at someone's evidence as a whole and work out, would you think they're a compulsive liar? Do we think they're just lying occasionally? Do we think they're always telling the truth? But in this case, although there is a he said, she said aspect to it, there's a lot of independent evidence. We've got evidence of them going to Parliament House. We've got evidence of her being found by a security guard hours after he left in a state of undress. There's a whole bunch of independent evidence which you then weigh into the issues of credit. And I think there's actually enough independent evidence, and so did the judge, to find pretty heavily in favour of Brittany Higgins' account of the events and find against Lehrmann's account.
Now, the next thing is, given that Justice Lee has found that many of the witnesses were dishonest in their testimony, does this open up the possibility of perjury?
Yes, so there is a potential for contempt of court charges against Bruce Lehrmann because he has leaked some information which was confidential in relation to the criminal trial. So he might be prosecuted for contempt of court. But if you lie in a legal proceeding, generally you don't actually get prosecuted for perjury unless the lie is very specific and unable to be proved to be 100% false. And that's really rare. Normally they say, look, I just don't believe you, and so you lose your case, and that's the end of it.
All right. So in your view, where does it go from here?
Yeah, what a nightmare. Well, I think there'll probably be an appeal. I hate to say it, but I think there'll be an appeal by Lehrmann and his solicitors, assuming he can afford it, and assuming there's some basis for an appeal. There almost always is an appeal, and that's what happened in the Ben Roberts-Smith case, and the appeal was pretty quickly dismissed, and I think this one probably will be too, but I think there'll be an appeal, and then I suspect that'll be the end of it.
Alex, I'm sure we'll talk again. Hopefully we're not talking about this, though.
Yes, thanks, Stephen. I appreciate you having me on.
Good on you, mate. Alex Martin is the partner at Taurus Legal.